Welcome to Farmtips Diary. A century ago, cows ate what grew nearby. Grass in summer, hay in winter, and little else. Today, cattle consume scientifically formulated rations calibrated to maximize milk production, growth rates, and feed efficiency while minimizing environmental impact. This is the story of how cow feed transformed from simple forage into complex nutritional systems, and what the next 50 years might bring as technology and sustainability reshape what cattle eat. When cows ate, simply. Early 20th century cattle diets reflected the constraints and rhythms of pre-industrial agriculture. Understanding this baseline helps appreciate how dramatically feeding systems evolved. In 1925, dairy cows and beef cattle primarily ate pasture during growing seasons. Grass provided the foundation of nutrition for most of the year across most of the country. Cattle grazed fields, roadsides, and woodlands, converting forage humans couldn't eat into milk and meat. This system was sustainable but produced modest yields by modern standards. Winter feeding relied on hay, the only practical method for preserving forage before silage technology became widespread. Farmers cut grass and clover, dried it in fields, and stored it in barns. Quality varied enormously depending on weather during harvest, storage conditions, and plant maturity at cutting. Poor quality hay meant thin cows and reduced production through long winters. Grain supplementation was minimal and primarily limited to draft animals needing energy for work or dairy cows in late pregnancy and early lactation. Corn, oats, and wheat bran provided concentrated energy but were expensive. Most farmers fed grains sparingly, only to high-value animals at critical times. The majority of beef cattle never saw grain until the final weeks before slaughter. If at all, protein supplements were virtually unknown. Farmers didn't understand protein chemistry or amino acid requirements. If cows had access to legume hay like clover or alfalfa, protein needs were usually met. Otherwise, protein deficiency limited production potential. The concept of balancing rations for specific nutrients didn't exist in practical farming. Water access was surprisingly variable. Many cattle drank from streams, ponds, or wells with no consideration of water quality or consistency. In winter, farmers sometimes had to chop ice or haul water, limiting consumption and reducing production. The importance of clean, abundant water wasn't fully appreciated. Minerals and vitamins received no attention. Deficiencies went unrecognized or misattributed to other causes. Cattle developed health problems from selenium, copper, or vitamin A deficiency without anyone connecting symptoms to nutrition. Salt was sometimes provided but inconsistently. The micronutrient dimension of nutrition was completely invisible. Feed storage and handling was crude. Hay often molded or deteriorated over winter. Grain stored in bins attracted rodents and spoiled from moisture. Feed waste was enormous by modern standards. The concept of total mixed rations ensuring every bite contained balanced nutrition was decades in the future. Milk production averaged 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per cow annually, about 1/4 of modern levels. Beef cattle took 3 to 4 years to reach market weight. These modest results reflected the simple, forage-based diets that limited what genetics could express. Better feeding was the key to unlocking higher production. The Industrial Revolution in feed mid-century industrialization transformed cattle feeding as dramatically as it changed every other aspect of agriculture. Scientific understanding, mechanical innovation, and agricultural specialization all converged to revolutionize diets. Silage making became widespread after World War II. This preservation method ferments chopped crops in oxygen-free conditions, creating stable, palatable feed that maintains quality through storage. Corn silage, particularly, became a dairy staple, providing high-energy forage that boosted milk production substantially. The ability to harvest whole plants, including grain and stalks, captured more nutrients per acre than grain alone. Tower silos became iconic agricultural structures, as farms invested in storage capable of preserving summer's abundance for winter feeding. The fermentation process made nutrients more digestible while preventing the spoilage that plagued hay. Silage allowed higher quality forage preservation regardless of weather, eliminating the gamble of haymaking. Soybean meal revolutionized protein supplementation in the 1950s and 60s. This byproduct of soybean oil extraction provided concentrated, affordable protein that transformed feeding economics. Suddenly, balancing rations for protein became practical and economical. Dairy cows could consume the protein needed to produce large milk volumes without requiring enormous quantities of expensive grain. Precision weighing and ration formulation emerged as animal nutrition became a science. Researchers quantified energy, protein, mineral, and vitamin requirements for different classes of cattle. Land-grant universities published feeding guides. Nutritionists emerged as specialized professionals who formulated rations optimizing production and efficiency. Feed companies developed premixes containing precise nutrient combinations. Commodity grain markets integrated nationally, making corn and soybeans available year-round at predictable prices. Farmers were no longer limited to what they grew locally. They could purchase optimized ingredients and formulate ideal rations. This market integration allowed specialization. Some farms produced feed crops while others focused on livestock, with both benefiting from efficiency gains. Feed processing technologies, including grinding, pelleting, and steam flaking, improved digestibility and feed efficiency. Cattle extracted more nutrients from processed feeds than whole grains, reducing waste and cost per pound of production. These processing methods were impractical on individual farms, but economical at commercial feed mills. Growth-promoting additives, including antibiotics and hormones, entered cattle feeding in the 1950s. Subtherapeutic antibiotic feeding improved feed efficiency by 5 to 10%, making cattle production more profitable. Hormone implants in beef cattle increased growth rates and feed conversion. These tools became standard practices, though later controversial. The cumulative effect was dramatic production increases. Dairy cow milk production doubled between 1950 and 1980. Beef cattle reached market weight in 18 months instead of 3 years. Feed cost per unit of production declined substantially. The industrial feeding model proved its economic superiority so decisively that it became essentially universal in commercial operations. The era of precision nutrition, late 20th and early 21st century cattle feeding, moved beyond formulation to optimization, using technology and data to fine-tune every aspect of nutrition for maximum efficiency. Total mixed rations became standard in dairy operations. Instead of feeding components separately, farmers mixed forages, grains, protein, minerals, and additives into uniform blends, ensuring every bite delivered balanced nutrition. TMR eliminated selective eating where cattle consumed preferred items while avoiding less palatable necessities. This consistency improved health, production, and feed efficiency. Computer formulation software replaced manual calculations. Nutritionists input ingredient analysis, cattle requirements, and ingredient costs. Programs calculated optimal rations, maximizing production per dollar spent or per unit of nutrient. These tools made sophisticated optimization accessible to average farms. Not just large operations with dedicated nutritionists. Near-infrared spectroscopy revolutionized feed testing. This technology analyzes moisture, protein, fiber, and energy content within minutes rather than the days or weeks required by traditional wet chemistry. Farmers could test forages at harvest, during storage, and before feeding, adjusting rations continuously as ingredient composition changed. This precision eliminated guesswork. Individual cow feeding systems using electronic identification allow tailoring rations to specific animals. High-producing cows receive more concentrate, while lower producers get less expensive rations. This individualization optimizes returns by matching input costs to production potential. Some advanced dairies feed differently based on milk production, pregnancy status, and health history. Rumen modifiers, including yeast cultures, direct-fed and ionophores, improve digestive efficiency by optimizing the rumen microbial population. These additives increase how much energy and protein cattle extract from feed, reducing how much they need to eat for equivalent production. The improvements seem small, 3 to 5%, but compound significantly over hundreds of animals and entire production cycles. Bypass protein and fat supplements provide nutrients that escape rumen degradation, delivering them directly to the small intestine, where cattle absorb them more efficiently. These protected nutrients allow meeting requirements without feeding excessive total protein or energy that would be wasted or create health problems. The sophistication represents a fundamental shift from feeding the cow to feeding the rumen microbes that feed the cow. Amino acid balancing entered cattle nutrition recently. Researchers identified that specific amino acids, particularly methionine and lysine, limit milk protein production even when total protein is adequate. Supplementing these amino acids in protected forms increases protein efficiency, reducing total protein requirements and nitrogen excretion while maintaining production. Sustainability concerns increasingly influence feeding. Reducing methane emissions through feed additives like seaweed extracts and nitrates is under intensive research. Minimizing nitrogen and phosphorus excretion through precise nutrient balancing reduces environmental impact. Using byproducts like distillers' grains, citrus pulp, and bakery waste reduces resource consumption while maintaining production. Sustainability, reshaping feed sources. The past decade brought accelerating change as climate concerns, resource scarcity, and consumer preferences push cattle feeding toward lower environmental footprints and alternative ingredients. Methane-reducing additives are commercializing. Seaweed extracts containing bromoform reduce enteric methane emissions by 30 to 80% depending on inclusion rates and cattle type. While expensive currently, scaling production could make these additives economically viable. Reducing methane from cattle represents one of agriculture's most impactful climate interventions. Insect protein from black soldier, fly larvae, and other species is entering cattle feed. These insects efficiently convert organic waste into protein suitable for cattle, while cultural acceptance and regulatory approvals are ongoing. Insect protein could eventually displace some soybean meal, reducing land use for protein production substantially. Algae and single-cell proteins produced through fermentation offer another alternative protein source. Companies are producing microbial protein from methane, carbon dioxide, or plant sugars. These systems require minimal land and water compared to conventional feed crops. Early products target aquaculture, but could expand to cattle as production scales and costs decline. Precision fermentation is producing specific proteins and fats that can supplement or replace conventional ingredients. This biotechnology mimics natural nutrients through fermentation rather than agriculture, while primarily targeting human food currently. The technology could eventually provide cattle feed ingredients with minimal environmental footprint. Regenerative agriculture principles are influencing feeding systems. Farmers are growing diverse cover crop cocktails for forage, reducing reliance on monoculture corn and soybeans. Multi-species pastures with grasses, legumes, and forbs provide more complete nutrition while building soil health. These systems reconnect crop and livestock production in beneficial cycles. Reduced reliance on grain is gaining attention. Grass-finished beef and pasture-based dairies represent small but growing segments, responding to consumer demand for less intensive production. While these systems produce lower yields per animal, proponents argue they use land unsuitable for crops and avoid inputs required for grain production. Byproduct utilization continues expanding. Cattle increasingly consume food processing waste, spent grains from breweries, citrus pulp, potato waste, and numerous other materials. This diverts waste from landfills while reducing feed costs and resource consumption. The circular economy model is becoming central to sustainable feeding. Carbon footprint, labeling, and sustainability certifications are beginning to influence markets. Beef and dairy products with verified lower environmental impacts can command premiums or access preferred supply chains. This creates incentives for feeding practices that reduce emissions and resource use, even if they cost slightly more. The next 50 years looking forward, cattle feeding will likely transform as dramatically in coming decades as it did over the past century. Several trends seem likely to accelerate. Artificial intelligence and machine learning will optimize feeding with unprecedented precision. Systems will analyze thousands of variables including weather, forage quality, milk production, feed costs, and cattle health to recommend daily ration adjustments. Real-time optimization will replace the periodic reformulations current systems use. Genetic selection of cattle for feed efficiency will reduce how much animals must eat for equivalent production. Residual feed intake, the measure of efficiency beyond what size and production predict, has substantial genetic variation. Selecting for efficient animals could reduce feed requirements by 10 to 20% over several generations, dramatically improving sustainability. Genome editing might enhance digestive efficiency directly. Researchers are exploring modifications to rumen microbial populations or cattle, genetics that improve nutrient extraction or reduce methane production. While controversial and heavily regulated, these technologies could address sustainability challenges conventional selection cannot. Personalized nutrition based on individual cattle microbiomes seems likely. As understanding of how rumen microbes affect efficiency grows, farmers may supplement or modify populations to optimize each animal. Precision probiotics tailored to specific cattle rather than one-size-fits-all approaches could substantially improve outcomes. Alternative forages adapted to changing climates will emerge. Drought-tolerant grasses, heat-resistant legumes, and novel crops might replace traditional forages in regions where climate change makes conventional species less viable. Research is identifying plants that cattle can utilize but that require less water or tolerate temperature extremes. Cellular agriculture producing meat without cattle could reduce demand for beef production while leaving dairy relatively unaffected. If cultured meat captures significant market share, fewer beef cattle would need feeding, though dairy cattle populations might remain stable or grow. This split would reshape feed markets and production geography. Complete diet automation from forage production through feeding seems increasingly feasible. Autonomous equipment could harvest, process, store, and deliver feed with minimal human intervention. This would reduce labor while improving consistency and timing. Farms might transition from feeding cattle to managing systems that feed cattle. The unknown wildcards include policy interventions like carbon taxes or methane regulations that could suddenly make certain practices essential or economically unviable. Consumer preferences might shift dramatically toward or away from conventional animal products. Technological breakthroughs in alternative proteins could emerge unexpectedly. These uncertainties mean the future won't simply extrapolate current trends. What seems certain is that cattle feeding will continue evolving toward greater efficiency, lower environmental impact, and more sophisticated optimization. The simple grass and hay of 1925 has become complex rations optimized through science and technology. The next 50 years will likely see sophistication exceed what we can currently imagine. Recap. Traditional early 1900s cattle diets consisted primarily of pasture grass in summer and hay in winter with minimal grain supplementation, producing modest milk yields of 3,000 to 4,000 pounds annually. Mid-century industrialization brought silage preservation, soybean meal protein, precision formulation, and growth additives that doubled production. Recent decades introduced total mixed rations, computer optimization, individual cow feeding, rumen modifiers, and amino acid balancing that fine-tuned efficiency. Sustainability concerns now drive adoption of methane-reducing additives, alternative proteins from insects and algae, regenerative forage systems, and circular economy approaches using byproducts. The next 50 years will likely bring AI optimization, genetic selection for efficiency, personalized microbiome management, climate-adapted forages, and potentially disruptive technologies like cellular agriculture that reshape demand. Throughout this evolution, the goal remains balancing animal health, economic viability, and environmental responsibility. If this journey through a century of changing cattle nutrition gave you perspective on agricultural innovation, give this video a like and share it with anyone interested in how farming evolves. Subscribe to Farmtips Diary for more explorations of agricultural transformation across time. Hit that notification bell so you never miss insights into where farming has been and where it's headed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.